And I rise to speak in opposition of this bill, which is nothing but a distraction from the Coalition's ABC cuts and failures on regional media. Ostensibly, this bill is to facilitate the provision of broadcasting services by the ABC that meet and reflect the needs of rural and regional Australia and ensure rural and regional communities are provided for in the functions of the corporation and through representation on the ABC board. But in reality, this bill is nothing but window dressing and will achieve nothing to improve rural and regional service provision. In fact, this bill is quite insulting to the rural and regional communities who have already lost so much through funding cuts by this government to their much-loved and much-needed ABC. This bill will achieve nothing because what the ABC needs is funding, not legislative change that introduces more bureaucracy, but funding. The ABC needs funding not just to meet the needs of growing populations in regional and rural areas, but because these areas have been targeted by funding cuts. Those on the other side don't like to be reminded of the fact that since 2013 the Liberals have cut a staggering $366 million from the ABC, completely in breach of an election promise. Who can forget Tony Abbott's promise on the eve of the 2013 election that there will be no cuts to the ABC? Well, maybe those on the other side have forgotten, but Labor has not. The Australian people have not, and the rural and regional communities who are struggling to have their voices heard and their stories told have definitely not forgotten that. In 2014, the Liberals cut $254 million from the ABC. In 2016, the Liberals cut a further $28 million. And in 2018, they announced a further $83.7 million in ABC cuts with a freeze on indexation, and they're still at it. The Prime Minister's latest budget locks in these $83.7 million of cuts over 3 years. Where will it end, Mr Deputy Speaker, I ask? Privatisation? For example, we know the Liberals are thinking about it. In June 2018, the Liberal Federal Council voted to privatise the ABC. The motion said the Federal Council calls for the full privatisation of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. Again, where will it end? And these cuts come with a cost, and that cost is to jobs and communities. The ABC has been forced to cut 800 jobs since the slashing began to free up funds to continue investing in Australian content, educational resources and regional communities, as it is required to do under its charter. But simply injecting the words such as regional and rural Australia into legislation does not ensure our ABC is adequately resourced to deliver. The final report of the ACCC Digital Platforms Inquiry in June this year examined ABC funding and found that the public broadcasters are not currently resourced to fully compensate for the decline in local reporting previously produced by traditional commercial publishers, and recommended that stable and adequate funding be provided to the ABC and SBS. And is it any wonder? Since 2014, 800 ABC staff have lost their jobs. The Australian network has been axed. Shortwave radio has been shut down. The number of hours of ABC factual programming has dropped by 60%. The number of hours of programming of drama has dropped by 20%. The number of hours of documentary has dropped by 13.5%. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to talk specifically now about the cuts to the ABC that have had a direct impact on my electorate of Shortland. Now, I must say Shortland is still serviced by ABC television and radio. The sad thing is it's not as well serviced as it used to be. This is not a reflection on the hard-working staff there or the equally committed management. It's just a result of having to do more with less. More because audiences demand it. And the major impact of those horrid 2014 cuts was on ABC 1233 Newcastle, which covers the entire Hunter region, which was downgraded from a metropolitan station to a regional one. What did that mean? Overnight, 1/4 of the staff at ABC Newcastle lost their jobs. 1 in 4, Mr Deputy Speaker. This has obviously had a major impact on the employees left, expected to do the same, if not more work, with less resources. The staff left are doing their best to deliver news across all platforms that today's audiences demand, but they make them do with much less. I raised this issue in the House in 2014, and I said that because of the budget cuts, we will lose Helen Clare, Carol Duncan and their teams who produce quality radio shows that speak to and about our community. Most importantly, our community will suffer because this will have an impact on the station's ability to provide emergency coverage. And Mr Deputy Speaker, nobody from Newcastle, Lake Macquarie or the Central Coast will forget the devastating bushfires that ravaged our region in October 2013. In my electorate, families were evacuated and traffic diversions put in place. It was the local ABC radio that kept us informed of where evacuation centres were, when it was safe to return home, and what the impact was on our environment and on our towns. It was the local ABC radio that provided a space for the outpouring of community spirit. They harnessed the generosity of the people that live in the Hunter and Central Coast and helped coordinate donations for those who had been forced to flee their homes and who had lost so much. It is in times of disaster that we see the best of our communities, and ABC 1233 Newcastle is a vital part of ours. To see it gutted was devastating. This government hurt the people of the Hunter region, and they should be ashamed. They made a solemn election eve promise of no cuts to the ABC, but it's the people of the Hunter and Central Coast and the great services of 1233 ABC that suffer because of this lie. Mr Deputy Speaker, we know at the time how bitterly disappointed the staff were and how bitterly disappointed our community was. The loss of our two local programs was devastating for our community. Regional and rural communities struggle to have their stories heard, with fewer local programs focused on regional and rural areas, fewer local stories are told. It was a sad day for our community. It was a dark day for our community, because the ABC is not just a broadcasting service. It is an institution. The ABC can always be relied on to promote and defend the Hunters' interests, and the Central Coast as well, in times of crisis, including natural disaster. It plays the role of the emergency broadcaster, and that is so vital as we are seeing the current bushfires, Mr Deputy Speaker. We are seeing, due to climate change, the bushfire season starting earlier, lasting longer and being more severe. We need more funding for the ABC in that context, not less. And Mr Deputy Speaker, the ABC matters to Australians. Before the last election, more than 107,000 Australians signed up to the Labor's petition to protect public broadcasting, making it our third highest ranking petition. Since that election, we've seen further closures of commercial radio newsrooms, Win in Orange, Dubbo, Albury, Wagga and Wide Bay. Regional media is struggling, and the ABC must be there for those communities. Sadly, many Australians have felt the loss of local reporting in their community. And it manifests itself in many ways, Mr Deputy Speaker. For example, the decision by ABC Grandstand to axe Craig Hamilton from the Rugby League broadcast is a disgrace. This is a disgrace that means that Newcastle has lost their local voice of rugby league. A sportscaster that served our community for over 20 years has been lost, no doubt due to the funding pressures and the pressure on the ABC to streamline its services. They, in fact, said that the reason they made this decision was they needed a uniform approach across rugby league broadcasting. Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I would submit that budget pressures have clearly played a role in that. And as I said, the ACCC has completed a major inquiry which found that the public broadcasters are not currently resourced. The government needs a real plan to address the decline in local news in rural and regional Australia. The government should put its money where its mouth is, stop cutting the ABC and provide stable and adequate funding to the ABC for local news in rural and regional Australia. Cutting the ABC and meddling with the ABC Act and Charter isn't going to improve service provision in rural and regional Australia, but funding the ABC properly will. The Liberals and Nationals are crying crocodile tears just at the same time they're cutting $83.7 million from the ABC. They introduced a bill that will cost the ABC hundreds of thousands in taxpayers' dollars on more bureaucracy and red tape. Labor took a policy to the last federal election to reverse the government's ABC budget cuts and commit an additional $10 million over 3 years for ABC local and regional media and emergency broadcasting. The government needs to put its money where its mouth is. In 2018, as I said, the Liberal Federal Council voted to privatise the ABC. Without additional ABC funding, it's obvious this bill forms part of a plan to privatise the ABC by stealth and by 1,000 cuts. Whilst Labor will not stand for it, the Australian people will not stand for it, the government needs to stop its window dressing with bills such as this, stop the cuts to the ABC and properly resource the ABC to support our rural and regional communities.